from the Ticats Audio Network, this is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
In a week when two undefeated teams and two winless teams produced fantastic finishes, Danny Machoch's debut a disaster, while the CFL earns a victory in Nova Scotia. Welcome to the CFL This Week. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil. Now let's go deep with their knowledge, thoughts, and opinions. We've got a trio of fine fellas. He is the Hall of Fame columnist from the Hamilton Spectator, covering everything from a flea flicker to a triple sow cow. This is Steve Milton. All right, making a huge name for himself and his partner out in Alberta and all over the country from the Tune Out podcast, he is Travis Currah.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good morning.
And celebrating the history of the fine game we all do love is for a first time, is Mr. Greg Smith from CFL Radio America.
Hey, it's an honor to be on. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for joining us. Folks, let's get right into it. This is, again, a fantastic week. Every week seems to be gaining in more storylines, but let's start with what I thought was just an outstanding game. The Blue Bombers win over the Stampeders. It was the best games played in years. Steve, I'll start with you. Why or why not?
I wouldn't say years, plural. I mean, what about the Great Cup? You know, I mean, but it's right up there. It's a classic one that they needed this kind of thing because there weren't enough of them during last year, and a lot of factors to it. Don't you think, guys? Yeah. These are two teams that have really understood the change in rules and timing, and with the spacing of the hash marks, and both of them have really taken. I thought are probably among the top three teams that having used that this year. We're seeing the value of two things here: a better type of training camp, and also preseason games to work out a few bugs. So, particularly for a team like Calgary, which I don't think was expected to be as strong as they are, and then you get two premier quarterbacks like this that have done it. So, yeah, it gives you the kind of and there were mistakes. Yes. And you can't have good CFL football without good mistakes, as we found in every single game this weekend. So yeah, I think I'd say it's a brilliant game. It's a needed game. It was a needed kind of weekend. It's actually been a pretty good start for the CFL that way, if they can figure out the best way to sell it. And the best way to sell it, of course, is to play them.
And it goes to show you, Travis, that when you throw in a little atmosphere amongst all the things that Steve said, you've got something that I think is very compelling to watch on television.
Oh, yeah, that crowd in Winnipeg, they are boisterous. Loudest fans in the CFL. I know other fan bases will, they'll want to disagree, but that stadium gets loud, those fans get loud, and Steve's right. Mistakes make great football, and the final, play of the game was a mistake, and it made the game. My jaw just absolutely dropped, but it's almost like Winnipeg practices those tip drill interceptions. It happened in the Grey Cup, but man, there was the other overtime game, and I know the Ticats losing to Calgary earlier this year, but Calgary, they always seem to stick around, don't they? They've been down in almost every game this year, other than the Edmonton game last week, but they kept in it here. And if you look at the stats, I mean, Winnipeg almost had the ball for 40 minutes of the game, but Calgary just hung around. And it's good to see Bo Mitchell and Zach Collaros both healthy. Collaros 2 games in a row. I thought maybe the Calgary defense could slow him down, but that performance against BC and then this performance against Calgary, I'm looking forward to that rematch on July 30th. I think it might be an even better game in Calgary.
Greg, your thoughts?
You know what? To pivot off what Travis said, yeah, I agree with him. Same thing. It's one of those games where, and unfortunately, the game was on ESPN down here, but it was on ESPN Plus. One of those games that you, as a CFL fan, when I'm talking to people down here going, hey, you need to watch CFL, I wish it would have been on regular cable on ESPN2 or even on one of the ESPN channels to say, hey, this is what the game is all about. For me, it was really it's what we lacked last year in terms of just a compelling from start to finish. And so, I mean, those are my thoughts on it. When it came to, just the final score, I mean, had a feeling Winnipeg was going to win it, but at the same time, they had to earn that win. It wasn't anything that they can really be proud of going into. It's like, yeah, there was a lot to learn by Winnipeg from Winnipeg. Winnipeg had a lot to learn in this win because it easily could have been a loss.
Two things about that and Winnipeg. At some point, first of all, when you have Zach long enough and healthy enough, you know you're going to end up with that type of thing. But secondly, the mistakes I thought by Calgary there and Winnipeg, are they going to be? Some feeling around the league is some of this luck of theirs going to. I mean, those tip drills, is it some of it going to even out or not? And that's why I mentioned Zach first, because when you have Zach and when you have an offensive line that is clearly better than any offensive line in the league, then you're going to have the chance to always, maybe take advantage of your own luck. But, I mean, you take that final play, it was partly forced because of the sack before then of having great guys coming off the edge by Winnipeg to force second and long, to force things faster and put it in the mind that they maybe have to throw the ball harder and faster. And I don't think we'll see Kamar Jordan have a game like that again, for a long
You should have 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and as far as Winnipeg goes, like they almost went to overtime with Toronto. They missed the kick.
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm saying.
It's just like good teams and
kicking is a concern there again.
Yeah, that Sergio Castillo signing last year, they probably lose the Grey Cup without him.
There's no doubt.
It's just like good teams like them. They just find ways to win no matter what. Right. A lot of times it's not pretty. A lot of times it's ugly, but it's just in their DNA. It's like they won't accept losing somehow, and I think we saw it again this week.
Yeah.
Guys, speaking of DNA, and we don't brag enough, I think, about this Canadian game because, I mean, I think we all watch all brands of football. And, Greg, I think had a game like that ended in the National Football League, you'd be seeing that highlight over and over and over again.
We'd be talking about it till the next NFL scandal, which usually happens every about 2 days around here. So,
You know what, guys? So let's take a look at the game a little bit deeper here. At the end of the day, Steve, and I know this is kind of a wacky question, but did the Bombers win that game, or did the Stampeders lose the game? If you look with what I'm saying here, in terms of who should get credit for the victory or loss.
Well, it's a tough one. That's probably. Yeah, I think you can make a case for both. I think if you're in Calgary, you say they lost it. If you're in Winnipeg, they say they won it. I think that's the case of a lot of games this weekend. I mean, did somebody lose it or did somebody win it? And that, I think, is why all 4 of us agreed it was a pretty good weekend.
yeah.
I mean, if you look, Bo had a very kind of average.
Yeah.
He was 12 for 28. But
That's what I was just going to.
Yeah,
that's what I was just going to say. If you're going to win, you got to complete more than 12 passes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, Calgary on the probably on that balance lost it, but boy, it was pretty marginal.
Yeah, I was surprised with how well they were able to run the ball against Winnipeg. They've got a tough run defense, and Kadeem Carey had 9 yards of carry, and that's, I think, what kept them in it. If they weren't able to run, Winnipeg probably pulls away. And they had a receiver getting his first ever start, and we've seen that with Winnipeg. Kenny Lawler leaves. Carlton Agadosi has 70 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Wow.
Yeah, what a debut. It just, I mean, it doesn't hurt when you have the reigning MOP throwing you the ball and finding ways to extend plays.
You don't see this as much anymore, but I thought about it when I watched Agadosi on that. How tired he was, and I thought TSN did a great job of centering on him on the next play, that he couldn't even move. But it used to be a thing in the first exhibition games many years ago, before guys arrived in much shape as they are.
Yeah.
First year players to this league, we used to actually watch them and see. You could almost do an over/under on how exhausted they were going to be. What, another play already? And you'd see them throwing up on the sidelines. Well, it reminded me of that.
Milton, it reminded me Tell me, here's a name for you from the past. When I watched that Agadosi, the way he caught those 2 touchdown passes, which were, almost, indefensible. And you guys might remember this name too, Preche Rodriguez.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that guy?
Preche, yeah.
Rookie of the year for crying out loud. I don't know what happened to him after, but that big body style. And I think Agadosi in his post-game comments talked about the fact that he plays a lot of basketball too. So that little looping ball that Caleros threw to him appeared to be kind of just like he was playing basketball there, Greg.
Yeah. It's, got the basketball skills. It's something too in football. You always look for a guy with good hoop skills, because when you get passes like that with that talent, that can be either make or break catch.
All right, guys. The CFL, as I said, sells the sizzle out east with the festivities. It ends up being a fine football game in Nova Scotia. TD Atlantic, I'd have to say, was a pretty big success. But at the end of the day, Travis, we'll start with you. Is this bring this league any closer to being a 10-team league with a team, whether it be in Newfoundland or anywhere out east? Are we any closer, do you think?
Well, I don't know how far this game goes to getting a stadium built. They had to expand it to 10,000 people, and look, it was a beautiful location for a game, and it looked like the Acadia campus. Wow, like that was awesome. It looks like the atmosphere was great. I would like to know how many locals were there, because if a third of them were flying in from Saskatoon and Regina, and there was actually a good number of vocal Argo fans there as well. How many locals were invested into the game? That would be interesting to know, but it all comes down to the stadium, and the pandemic really put a stall on finances and all levels. It's a really deeper conversation than just football when it comes to securing funds for that stadium, but hey, I'd love a Grey Cup in the Maritimes.
Steve, it seems to be Randy Ambrosie's dream to get this done. Do you think he's any closer?
I don't think he's any closer than he was last week, as Travis is saying, and because the two things are ownership, meaning capital, and stadium, and they are indelibly linked. And that's when's that going to resume? But it's pretty important to have. Given everything, I think it's pretty important to have a team on the East Coast. One of which is to get some balance into schedule, so you can have the right dates and you don't have teams off, and you can all have the buy, the similar types of buys and those kinds. There's 1,000 reasons that you need a balanced schedule, and so that you can have, except for one team, I guess with will be 5-5, so that you can have teams within the division fighting each other at the end of the season. Where those playoff spots, and where you can probably say, let's get rid of the crossover, right? We don't need a crossover. The NFL doesn't have one. They have one within conferences, but they don't have them between East and West, AFL, AFC, and NFC. And that's that. It's important not to fool around with the integrity of the Grey Cup, which is should be an East-West thing. So very important to get it there, but I still think it's a long way away. I mean, they're not tied with the soccer people. They can't the soccer. So you can't. It's not going to be a multi-use stadium, a dual purpose stadium, which would work in a place like Halifax. It's important, and it has to be in Halifax. It can't be in any other city in Atlantic Canada, because people will travel to Halifax, but people from Halifax don't travel somewhere else. That's the history of Atlantic Canada when it comes to that.
Yeah, and
Greg,
I think,
what are your thoughts on this?
I think we're several seasons off. You've got to. This was a great weekend. It was. Visually. Camera. It was perfect. It was. It really was. You had a full. Toronto. Really, you had the same number of people in that stadium than you say, man, for an Argonauts game. But obviously, an Argonauts game looks a lot different with people spread out. So you had the same number of people, but it looked a lot better. It was packed. But you're still several seasons away from that happening, because you need to have more weekends like that to sell. Because bottom line is what you said, and it gets into a larger conversation, but the economics of it, the funding, you're not going to be able to have a football stadium, I think, anymore without some sort of public funds. And if you're going to justify it, you got to have more you have to be able to justify it. And the only way you can justify it is with the local enthusiasm, like Travis said. How many people locally showed up?
Guys, we keep continue. I mean, and if it doesn't happen out east in the Maritimes, I mean, are we not constantly talking about it being a football revival or a lot of good things happening in the province of Quebec? Like, I mean, the Quebec City there, Steve. I mean, Laval is king, and they're putting 12,000 in there for every single regular season game. They've had successful Vanier Cups. I mean, maybe it's time to think about elsewhere, and maybe even Quebec, which is a large province.
I've been looking at that backwards, which is through the soccer, Canadian Premier League for those people that don't know what that is, and they're going through the same thing about Laval, and of course, again, it comes down to the stadium and ownership there. And there's a big difference between the kind of numbers you can put in at $10 a seat in Laval. Without private boxes and all of those kinds of things, or not in Laval, but in Quebec. But that is an option. And, you know, ever since CEGEPS started in Quebec about 30 years ago, the football that comes out of Quebec is incredible. And you can see that reflected in the number of players going to the NFL and the CFL. And there are 2, possibly 3 teams. I suppose that's one of the issues in the East now. They're no longer as strong on the university level as they once were. Part of that is because Ontario and Quebec universities are keeping their players at home now, rather than having them go out to play at generally at St. Mary's and Acadia in the old days. So Quebec could be, but I think you'd be equally as far from anything there, time-wise, as Greg was saying earlier, as we are in the Maritimes. They're a long way down the road in the Maritimes in terms of putting all of the other stuff, the ancillary stuff, together. It's just the 2 big things, which is the stadium and the capital for ownership.
Travis, you're in a province that has 2 teams. I mean, could Quebec not do this?
Well, you'd think the population there, and it seems like it would just build another rivalry, at least for the Alouettes. And I think they've tried to kind of build the Ottawa-Montreal thing, but it would be on a whole other level if they had a Quebec City rivalry with Montreal. I would love to. It's interesting to see. I think it's the grassroots thing. Somehow they've got the community involved, and probably the university just loving the Rouge et Or in Laval. How do you? I wonder how they can make that happen with the other pro franchises in the league. You know, how do we make Toronto and Montreal as strong as they can be? Hey, we saw over 30,000 in Vancouver at the beginning of the season. It can be done. How do we make them as strong as possible on a consistent basis before welcoming a 10th team? Maybe that's a question too.
And as speaking as somebody who lives down south and is, you know, I'm in Chicago. We've got 2 baseball teams. If we can support 2 baseball teams over a long period of summer for over 100 years, then I don't see how a province of the same, you know, of a much, you know, about the same population can't support 2 football teams over the course of a season. Plus, too, you know, I mean, a rivalry between the Alouettes and a team in Quebec. I mean, rivalries are what we kind of live for in this sport. So, but the question being is, would Montreal support it? And I think unless the Alouettes, you know, because then it gets in the question of territory. Would the Alouettes want a team in Quebec invading their territory?
Yeah, it does narrow their territory because just to the west, to the northwest, I guess they have Ottawa too. So that is a double, you know.
Yeah, it's
a lot into their territory. But there hasn't really been a good Montreal-Quebec rivalry in any sport since the Nordique left, because junior hockey, Montreal doesn't take seriously, right? And so I mean, definitely it would be there. It would be something. You'd almost have to give them more games than you gave it, which you're not going to be able to do once you get to 10 teams. It's going to be balanced schedule. But you'd almost want to see that. You'd almost want to see 4 games between those 2.
You know, Steve, you kind of touched on something that kind of, I think we've talked about almost every single week on the CFL this week for the last little while, is the fact that, you know, coming off the game that we talked about in Calgary and Winnipeg, and even what we're seeing here in the situation in the Touchdown Atlantic, about just putting this team, or at least this league, into a 9-team situation. And I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger reality because they're making adjustments to the schedule. The schedule is seemingly messed up. You have a team like the Tiger Cats that play on a Saturday, have to travel out west for Vancouver, and with basically one day is practice, and you got to play on a Thursday. To me, it's a recipe for disaster. But going back to this, Steve, a 9-team league. Your thoughts? No divisions.
No. Not in 1,000 years. Not in my lifetime. And I will write about it with real swear words in the column. Anybody suggests it. Sorry. End of game. End of story. This thing, you start with what your major property is, which is the Grey Cup. Grey Cup is definitely an East-West thing. I know it's hokey, but hokiness sells. And every city that gets a Grey Cup that hasn't had one in a long time wants it back the next year, because especially places like Montreal, Toronto, BC that forget what it's like until the Saturday night and the Sunday of Grey Cup, and then they go, "Oh my God, I should have been here all week. I wish it was here back again next year." So the East-West, so you start there, and I still think the Grey Cup is undersold. No, not a 9-team league of any kind. I don't even like the crossover. Sorry,
Greg.
I'm the same. I agree with Steve. Yeah, keep 2 divisions. I mean, you've got the crossover and everything, but realistically, I mean, how often does a crossover team actually make it to the Grey Cup and play in it? So
Never.
I think you keep,
never.
Yeah. So I think you keep the 2 divisions, and I mean, that's part of competition. The East.
Well,
needs to get better.
here's the other thing. This isn't, and the United States is the same. Much as there's this great north-south thing in the United States, really the history of the United States is westward expansion. Am I right about that, Greg?
Correct. Yeah.
Right. So the history of this country is that it should have been a country that ran north-south, but it somehow worked to run east-west. And that's what the Grey Cup is a recognition of that. And we can bring that up all of the time. So that's another little thing on that historical thing. Maybe that's because I got my only class I ever went to in university.
No, that's okay, because it's down here. I always try, every now and then I'm full of useless knowledge, but I remind people, this used to be Quebec province in Chicago. It used to be a big part of Quebec. So, then again, I grew up in an area settled by the French Canadians. So,
1804, anyway. Right? Well, Louisiana Purchase.
Yeah.
Well, man, we got a history.
He just pulled out that 1804 pretty, wow.
I might be making that up because I know that you morons don't know.
Like that trick.
As far as
lay this card down. Boom.
As far as the one division thing goes, I think it's something that the diehard CFL fans that watch every single game would like. But could you imagine if there was no playoff games in Hamilton, Montreal, or Toronto, and they were all done in the West?
Right.
That would not. I don't think that would be good. Like,
I'm glad to see a lot of people out west don't recognize the problem that would present, Travis. I'm glad. I appreciate that you appreciate that.
Like,
the money
I can't
and
imagine
here.
If the whatever it would be, the East and West final, both Winnipeg and West, I think that would really hurt the interest in the playoffs and maybe the interest in the Grey Cup altogether.
And the interest in the next season in the East.
Yeah.
Guys, there were some people that were saying going into Saturday's battle that the Tiger Cats at 0-4 were the best 0-4 team in football. I mean, if that makes any sense. Regardless, they do battle back late. It looked like they were going to lose to the Ottawa Red Blacks. The Red Blacks looked like they were going to get their first win. Regardless, it's Hamilton that pull out the victory. In your opinions there, Travis, are the Tiger Cats back on track to getting back to the top of the Eastern Division?
Well, you know what? I think that the Ticats of last year might have just trounced Ottawa in this one. I'm still worried about the offense. In the first half, I really liked what they were doing. They looked like they kept Ottawa off balance. They had a 30-yard play to the fullback. They were putting Matt Schultz in there. Evans was coming back in. And then in the second half, I don't know if Ottawa didn't allow that, but the third quarter they got nothing done. And then in the fourth, I don't know if it was Dane feeling the pressure of possibly losing his job to Schiltz, but he looked like a completely different quarterback when he came in that, final winning drive in the fourth quarter. But they can't stop the turnovers. The protection. He's always looks like he doesn't have too much time. I'm still a bit worried. And Ottawa was without several starters on defense as well. And I'd be cautiously optimistic. It's good to get the win, but it wasn't a pretty one by any means.
Greg?
No, I agree with Travis. It wasn't pretty. I mean, the Ticats came out of the game. I mean, they finished the game. I mean, that's really. I mean, we've seen other games with the Ticats where you just got to finish, and they don't. But on this one, they did. And I mean, obviously, Dane Evans had good numbers, but and for the win. But again, it's just consistency. But they're in a division where everybody's still kind of trying to figure everybody out. So they've got time on this. I'm looking at the box score right now, and I'm kind of smiling because, Ottawa's got Jalen Acklin, and he's always a factor. I mean, he was I went to Western Illinois, so I've followed his career for a long time. So just knowing what he's capable of, he didn't bite the Ticats in the butt this time, but I mean, if he were still with the Ticats, I think the receiving game would be that much better. But with that said, hey, a win's a win, so you take it and you learn from it. But I think the Ticats, they're still trying to figure things out.
I think they did. The one thing that emerges from that, you guys are both right. This is very much a template of the last 5 games, going back to and including the Grey Cup. The way it looked like, blown lead, sacks at the wrong time, 5 sacks really, even though Dane had a lot more time to throw, mostly in the first half, and then they went away from that double. Sometimes they had a double tight end, but tight end they had. I think I counted 5 different guys played tight end, 3 linemen and 2 backs played tight end, and so they did some. That's the thing that encouraged me. They did a few things that they got out of what I've called their stubbornness a little bit. Now again at halftime, the other team seemed to adjust better. And that's a problem with this team right now. It happened in the Grey Cup. It happened in the first 4 games. And I have to say it happened in this game, too. They scored on their first drive. They gave them the ball with the wind, which is actually an unusual thing for Hamilton to do. Normally, they try to take the ball right away. And this time, they saved for the wind. And really, you could argue, may have won the game. Because there was a relatively short punt, and probably Lewis Ward had no chance of making what was it, 52 or 4? 54? 54 had no chance of that, partly because of which end he was kicking from, and that is a change in the so that those kinds of things. And the other thing is, Dane made the same types of throws, the 2 big throws on the last 5-play drive that had been dipped and deflected or intercepted hard into traffic, hoping that a good player would make a play, and they made plays. The receivers made 5, I counted, really good catches in this game, like really, really good catches.
That Dunbar catch? Whoa.
And 2 of them, really. Yeah. 2 Dunbar catches. The one where he stayed in bounds. And that was a good throw, too. So those things have a little way of, they often say that your losing streak starts while you're still winning, your winning streak starts when you're still losing, and it looked like that was going to be a loss. And a couple of things there, I think now when they get the chance at the end, which they've had in almost every game, they now know at least that they have done it, because you get to 5 games in which you don't do it. Now you're talking about, you're asking the question that coaches hate. They say it doesn't exist. I say it does, that you can learn how to lose as well as learn how to win. And, you have to wonder if the Ticats could have been approaching that.
Steve, and I'll come right back at you at this one, and I don't remember this, whether it was Masoli under center or it was Dane Evans under center for the majority of the season and into the playoffs. They seem to go into these incredible, tremendous ruts on offense.
Yes.
In the third quarter, 8 possessions.
Yep.
They had a streak there of 8 straight possessions where they had a fumble and a couple of 2-and-outs where nothing happened. Like,
and the first run was more predictable than it had been. It'd been more like the predictability of the run, the type of run. That was one thing they did in the first half, is the manner in which they threw the run at them. As I mentioned, with the extra blockers, that was one, but it was also who did it. I mean, still Schultz, running and clearly running. Dane on a call draw. Nobody was expecting that one. And then, of course, they're always trying to use I think it was White who ran the ball, but they can use Addison in there too. So they're doing anything to try and establish that run. But you're right. I think there was a ruddiness to that in the third quarter and a good part of the fourth.
Greg, what are you seeing? Like, it is surprising. I mean, because if you look at the roster of the Tiger Cats offense, to me, I think you're like, wow, loaded.
Yeah.
And can get better with guys like White that have, he's only a second-year player, Dunbar, second-year player. That they're just emerging, I believe. But
watch Johnson, too. Watch Anthony
Johnson. Well, I mean, look at what a debut. The guy has that incredible, 55-yard catch and then got smacked and then loses the football. But that does come back in the second half and have a touchdown. So, I look at it. Don Jackson, to me, is a tremendous downhill, 4-shifty runner, can come out of the backfield, yet it doesn't seem – I mean, they're just not scoring points, and it's not consistent there, Greg.
Yeah, but I see the glass as half full because they are spreading the ball around. And – maybe it's just going to take a few more weeks to finally figure it all out. I mean, they've got the personnel, they've got the talent, so luck kind of plays into it too.
Oh, that's what Dean's been saying all along. Is that sometime the luck has to turn.
Right.
Maybe it doesn't. Maybe luck goes a whole year and doesn't turn until next year. That's.
Travis, your thoughts there?
They're changing their center this season, correct? And I wonder if that has had a bigger effect on the offense than maybe we've realized. But when I noticed this last year, when they got Don Jackson into the offense, they seemed like a completely different team. Yeah. And they gave him 11 carries in this game. I think Ottawa, they were able to limit the run pretty well. He only had 3.4 yards a carry or something like that.
Yeah, he had 3.1 and 34 yards total.
Yeah. They at least went to him, Travis.
Exactly. And I think if they need to keep with at least the double-digit carries, because sometimes when they're only 5 or 6 carries, the defense just pins their ears back and they go right at Dane, and no quarterback is better under pressure. They can try to beat it, but the run game is only going to support the passing game, and they need to find a way to get it going. And that's, I think, if they get Don Jackson going and keeping him healthy, I think the offense will be okay. But the turnovers, and they mentioned it on the broadcast, completely different than last year. They're like -9, -10 at the beginning of the game, and last year. I still think the defense is top third, top half of the league. They just the offense needs to be more consistent. They do have the talent. But to get that running game going, more balance will go a long way in Hamilton.
Well, Travis, right back at you. I mean, will the enjoyment of this victory be short-lived in the fact that they got to travel west of Vancouver and play that guy Nathan Rourke, who you talk about someone that even coming off a loss. I mean, he didn't start very well against Winnipeg, but he actually ended very well.
Well, if you look at halftime, they were right in it, and they had 3 massive touchdown passes. I don't know if he can be stopped. As far as Winnipeg goes, I think their best defense in that game was a great offense. Currah stayed on the field, and Rourke never really got a opportunity at all to make many plays. When he got on the field, he did. I think Hamilton's offense needs to stay on the field to keep Rourke off of it. That might be the best strategy, but can they do it? You got to have the running game going to do that, I think.
Greg?
Yeah, I agree. And if Rourke gets hot, it's the way the BC Lions have been playing. Rourke is he's a great new quarterback, but you take him out of the equation, then I think it becomes more of an even game. But again, that passing game is phenomenal, but to me it just boils down to playing solid defense, and for the Ticats, just playing the fundamentals. Just yeah,
they've got to get to him a little better. I mean, than they have been getting to quarterbacks. I mean, they did have 3 sacks. It's nice to see Hauser finally pull 2 down. Because I felt that he had to. I mean, he had one earlier, but he really is the guy that they have to do more of. They're using the Canadian Mason Bennett a lot more up front, and they really have to get to him. But they still allowed, particularly in the third quarter, some second and longs, that were converted, and that's what I think Rourke can do. Rourke will be motivated. Quarterbacks don't want to be overly motivated, or they start pushing too hard. But this is the team he grew up watching. I'm at the stadium right now, and Rourke played in this stadium in high school, in one of the provincial championships here, because just from down the road, he was both times that he won the award for top Canadian. He won it. He was presented it in this building. So there's a lot. I mean, I realize the game's out there, but Hamilton Ticats means something to him.
Guys, the Alouettes blow a 19-point third-quarter lead and lose to the Edmonton Elks, who I guess have won 2 of 3. And this was Danny Machocha's debut. He's back on the sideline, the general manager now pulling the strings on the sidelines as the player. Now, I mean, you lose a 19-point lead. I think there are a lot of factors, Greg, in why you can say, why did the Owls lose this game? But it's a big deal in Montreal that he's on the sideline. So I got to point the finger at him. Was this a result of bad coaching?
Probably. I mean, I think when you blow a lead like that, you got deeper problems than just the coach. I mean, things obviously you guys see probably closer than I do down here, but just on the surface of it, I think it's like, it was bad. To me, it was bad coaching.
Well, part of coaching is instilling discipline. Now, he's only had a few days to do that. They've been by far the most undisciplined team in the league, and that leads to things in the locker rooms as well. And so now they get rid of the coach. They come in, and one defensive back costs them the game. That's essentially what it was. I mean, Sutton's penalties, 3 deep interference penalties, all of them in different ways. It wasn't just the same type of thing he did every time. Yeah. Each of them with a completely different type of penalty, and most of the time meaning he was beaten. So that's an issue right there.
Well, I think I saw a stat that Kenny Lawler, he drew 118 yards in penalties. That's one player, and the whole team gave up almost 200 yards in penalties. And there was a moment in the second half. It kind of looked like, well, they had the illegal substitution, too many men on the field for the Montreal offense. They just kind of lost control of their substitutions, and they didn't have the discipline, like Steve's saying.
Right.
I think that at least the general feeling that I had is that the players were a big fan of Kahari Jones, and watching that pregame speech, to me, was kind of uncomfortable. I think that they liked to have Kahari in there, and having him not there, it was just because of this business of pro sports. He wasn't Machocha's guy. And I think Machocha wants that opportunity to hire his own coach. And if we remember, Kahari kind of fell into the job in 2019. Right. Like, in the middle of training camp, he's the guy.
There's some opinions out there that in Machocha, he took the job, but his real dream was to be the head coach of the Alouettes there, Greg. Like, I mean, that's been floating around for years.
Yeah, and when you fire a coach at the beginning of the season, you're going to have a huge culture shift within literally not days, but hours. And then, go back to the penalties and everything. There was a moment during that game, I think I was grabbing a beer or something, and I heard the penalties. And there was that moment, like, did I just hear that right? I forget how many yards and penalties. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm not feeling good for the Alouettes this season now. I was feeling good for them at the beginning of the season, but now, I mean, you've got a whole new coach. You've got a lot of drama in there. I mean, all of us are in families, so we know when we have drama in the family, things aren't going well. But you've got drama there, and it's starting to spill over onto the field. And, it's a question where they're going to end up. I mean, very good question as to where they're going to end up by the end of the season.
I think a key game for them, as it will be for the Tiger Cats, they play each other right after the BC game, and that one will be a real gauge type thing to see, especially if Hamilton doesn't win in BC, just to see where one of those teams is going to be having some problems. But that's the East. I think the thing you have to keep control. This is just a horrendous year for the East, and we've seen a lot of horrendous years for the East over the years, and. You probably, as long as you can hang in there, you never know what's going to happen. So that's why I wouldn't lose too much faith if I were them. That doesn't mean their fans won't lose faith. If they keep, I mean, that was at home too. I mean, the next two games on the road, they haven't won on the road yet, and so that's an issue for them as well. I mean, this wasn't all Danny. This wasn't all Sutton. I mean, Harris can't throw that interception.
Right.
Well, and we talked about the unbalanced schedule. The only game that Montreal did win was Saskatchewan on a short week, traveling the country, losing their starting center Dan Clark, and then starting the game with the special teams touchdown. So that's the only game they're able to win. And I know that Vernon Adams Jr. maybe makes some mistakes and is inconsistent. But I think he might be one of the most popular players on the team, and he's on the sideline. He has the opportunity and I think ability to be one of the most exciting players in the CFL. Hey, mistakes makes good CFL football, exciting football, and he can extend plays with the best of them. And
But I feel like we've been saying that about this individual for a long time, Steve. We saw him in Hamilton. Greg, I know you've seen him. It's kind of like Arbuckle. Can you not find a home? Will someone not give you the trust? I don't know. Steve.
He was maybe they should take a page out of Hamilton here. Hamilton used both quarterbacks for two series in a row there, and there's things you can do with it now under the new rules. And remember, when he left here, when he was cut, Vernon by then had turned himself into a receiver because he wasn't going to make it a quarterback, right? And then June Jones said, "Hey, we're going to trade him," which of course meant they couldn't trade him. The GM's going, "What? You're saying this out loud that you're going to trade him?" So they end up, he ends up, maybe you can get him in there to do a couple of the things. A couple of teams have used that already, two quarterbacks at once, and then you can have the second throw on the play. I think they gotta have more for him because there are times when Trevor can, when he gets rolling, he can be unstoppable. Particularly against Hamilton. He just owns Hamilton over the years, and so when you play Hamilton, I think you got to have Trevor in there, but you got to have a package at least and it's very difficult to put a package in for a second quarterback just because of the length of time that you get to practice during a week. So you need a good long week or a day zero where you have an extra practice and that kind of thing. And I haven't looked at their schedule close enough to know if they have one, but I think you've got to have something in there. Both to take advantage of his popularity with his teammates, which is absolutely true, because he is a fairly effervescent guy, and Trevor isn't quite the same. He's not an effervescent guy like Adams is. So they if you got two guys, you got to find a way to kind of take advantage of the fact that you have two.
I think Vernon. I think he's 7 or 8 years younger. And I think the injury to William Stanback at the beginning of the year, that kind of changed their entire offense.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Because the offense, they tried to make it run through him, and it just didn't work the same with Antwi, and I don't know if it'll work the same with Fletcher. Stanback was a big loss.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy that, given the way things are in the league right now, makes a huge difference. I think I had him as my number 2 or 3 player in the league.
Yeah.
Guys, I didn't want to bog down the podcast with this because as of the taping of this last week, there was no decision coming down from the Canadian Football League, and probably put a bow on it this week here. The CFL's decision to suspend Garrett Marino 4 games, the Saskatchewan Roughriders defensive tackle or end. Steve, did they get it right the way they separated the 4 games into 3 different suspensions?
Absolutely. Absolutely, in my mind. And that's got Sean Burke's fingerprints all over the GM of Ottawa. My guess is that he came up with that idea. I'm hearing that from people. Because the template for hitting a quarterback defenseless and on purpose, which it clearly was, given that twist that he gave, was set by Simone Lawrence. So you couldn't go more than 2 games probably on that because of the Simone Lawrence similar situation against Zach Collar. So there's your 2. Now you just go 1 and 1 on the other ones. Now, when you're talking about potential racist comments, you'd say, well, that's only 1 game. If you go higher than that, you're going to get an appeal, and he was going to be playing the next game, right? They would appeal the whole thing. So that's why I think it was right. I mean, you might say it could have been a little bit more, but think about what 4 games is relative to an 18-game season. That's 22% of a season. So 22% of we pointed this out, and I think most people did. Like, suppose you were talking about the NHL, that would be, 18 games?
Yeah. Which
we would consider a very heavy penalty in the NHL, and in baseball it would be 35, right? So that's pretty serious, and they pretty well made it appeal proof, and that was the big part. So it sticks.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
One man's opinion.
I agree. I mean,
I went over it ad nauseum on our show last week. It's the flexing, the celebrating, walking off the field as Mazzoli's laying down. I mean, that's inexcusable. But when you separate them, yeah, I agree that it's appeal proof. But there will be a lot that say the racism allegations or the comments that he was making. But at some point, the league and the PA, they need to. Okay, 1 game for that? I don't know. They have to be like, okay, that's 0. We're not going to allow that at all. That's no tolerance on that. So I think 1 game from there on the outside, that could look a little bit. Look, the hit took Mazzoli out for a few months. So to put them in those tiers, I think it looks kind of not fishy, but it's an interesting way to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I thought 6 games. I really did. I thought 6 games in everything that happened. But then you bring up the great point there, Steve, that it's going to get appealed. And
he's playing. And then he's playing because now you're appealing the whole suspension.
Yeah.
So then he's playing. But that said, I was so glad to see Jeremiah come out and say something about it. Jeremiah's not the type that normally does, but so glad to hear him come out and say, "Whoa, that's not acceptable."
But that's what triggered the Saskatchewan response, which I'm surprised didn't come prior to Mazzoli. I think Mazzoli responded because he's like, "No one's talking to me, no one's giving me a call." Like, I mean, at the very least, I think, hey, no one wants to hurt anyone. I believe this in the league. I don't believe there are players out there that want to hurt each other. I mean, there are very few players. But, I mean, the fact that the Riders had no response, Greg, I mean, was kind of surprising.
Yeah, I mean, you would think they would have. I mean, you got to back your player up. I mean, you've got to not back your player up, but you've got to say you've got to say something. At that point, it's like, and here's what my question is moving forward from this. Okay, so what happens the next time this happens? Are we going to have the same template? I mean, are the owners going to, are the owners come off season? Are they going to, take a look at the rules here and what do we do the next time this happens? Because this is something that, this is something that down here would have taken on a life of its own.
It did here anyway.
But
it can't be over here.
Right.
And I don't think they can wait till the off season. I think they
Yeah.
need another statement here at some point. But
Yeah.
you got to watch that you're not saying we were wrong in our decision. So
Yeah.
they put. I agree with you, Travis. They put themselves in a bit of a bind here on the tiering
did.
thing. But the same way they made it work. There wasn't a really good out to this. This is the best out that they could have of a bunch of bad outs and that somebody put in a position with. I'll tell you something that the Rough Riders, the Red Blacks, are very upset about, and that's the manner in which the coach was a defensive coordinator celebrated with his own player while he was making the muscles and all of those kinds of things. And I think by then they knew, they haven't had any statement about the racism part, really, and that's as you guys both said, that's indefensible. And so I think at some point in here, when there's a little bit of time, but before the end of the season, you can't wait. You got to get back to the racism thing, and as a league, and say, we did what we did, and we agree with what we did at that point. But here's what's going to happen from this point on.
Right.
You even think about it, and it's going to be X number of games. And I think Bub, probably you're right. A third of the season for that, when you add them all the things up on top of that, could have been justifiable.
You know what? And this is, I guess, a different conversation, but about the Riders in general, what's going on with the discipline in that locker room? We saw in Touchdown Atlantic, Duke Williams throwing a helmet at Shaq Richardson, which is dangerous, very, very dangerous. He was
stays in the game?
And he was able to play, and he was accused of spitting in a player's face. We saw in the fourth quarter, I believe, Derek Moncrief holding on to DeVaris Daniels' leg for looked like 30 seconds after the play till he kicked him off. And Moncrief was already kicked out of a game, I believe, in Edmonton this year. There's some strange discipline issues happening in Saskatchewan right now, and we talked about it with Montreal. Is it top on down to that locker room? Yeah,
that thing about grabbing and lifting on the knee, that the quarterbacks hate that. That's very, very dangerous. And to see it happen twice in 2 weeks, I don't like it.
Oddly enough, the most vocal person, at least I think, when it really came out with the Marino situation, wasn't even any player from Ottawa or from Saskatchewan. It was Zach Collaros, who had a lot to say as the Winnipeg Blue Bombers quarterback. And really standing up for a guy that he's played with and played against, especially in these Grey Cup situations. I thought that was real interesting, Greg.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's behavior that's just plain outright uncalled for. And the question is what punishments are there? I mean, the punishment that was handed down sticks, great. But this is, we don't want it to happen again, but we just know how football is a very emotional sport. Something's going to happen. It's going to happen again. So then it kind of goes, then what? So you've got the precedent set for punishment. Okay, so what happens the next time? Everybody's, we live in a day and age, everybody knows it happened. So what does the commissioner come out and just say, boom,
No, he can't. He can't do that, given the relationship with the CFLPA right now. They've got to do this behind closed doors. I wouldn't be surprised if they're already talking about it.
Yeah.
Because there'd be a lot of members of that. We have a couple here that have said quietly. They haven't said it in public, but they've said it quietly that they don't like anything like this with minorities and that kind of. You can't be doing it, and it doesn't matter if it's a joke. It doesn't matter if it wasn't meant. It doesn't matter. Whatever the intention is where it lands. But you've got to do that with the CFLPA, I think, Greg. You really have to do that. You can't.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess I'm just very when it comes to
lately.
Right, and when it comes to sports, I'm very much in favor of a very strong commissioner who at times can be very dictatorial, and we know in the CFL we don't have that, and it would be nice for the CFL to have the commissioner to have that power when it comes to discipline, saying, "Hey, we're done." I mean, he doesn't have the power, obviously, like Judge Landis back in the in the 20s to kick people permanently out of a sport. But you know what? It would be nice if he did, at least when it comes to issues of racism, discipline, criminal behavior, because it only makes it, for us, a better sport. And also, too, and again, this is just my opinion, it helps attract newer fans by, I think, somehow having a strong commissioner. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who easily, we live in a social media age, probably be more CFL fans if we had, I think if we had a stronger commissioner, but that's just my opinion. So
I don't know that that's a personal thing as much as it, I mean, there are some manners in which Randy conducts himself. You kind of wonder, but I don't think it's who he is. I mean, he's a good guy. I really love him. He loves the game. Yeah. It's the manner in which it's been structured, and it's stronger now than it used to be.
Right.
Well, and they, correct me if I'm wrong, I think they've got a zero tolerance violence against women policy. If you get caught, you get charged, you're done. Yeah. I have no problem if they expand that to include the racism. You say something, you do something, you're done. But sometimes I guess you got to deal with the PA and the union and put these things into place and have them written in stone. It wasn't probably before this game. You get that written in stone. But again, the PA, they've got to represent the players that are injured and the players that are, I guess, being targeted by this as well. They've got to look out for those guys, not protect some of the guys that are saying these things or doing these dirty hits, late.
The PA's always been in a rough spot there, but it eventually comes down to this: which one of the two is worse? Not like not standing up for the one, and and clearly on most of these cases, the answer's fairly clear.
And I heard Trevor Harris say he's still experiencing numbness in one of his legs from a Garrett Marino hit in the past as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the quarterbacks, we heard you mentioned Zach Collaros. I mean, they're pretty united on this front.
Right. That said, normally when something happens and somebody gets there gets to be a bit of piling on afterwards. But I'm not saying Trevor is, but that is the tendency over time with these types of things. But it really,
the social media storm was wild for this one.
Yeah.
Guys, the CFL and the players union apparently have a lot of work to do, and you guys have put in a just tremendous work here on the CFL this week. We thank each one of you guys. Travis, where do we find you?
Well, the 2 and Out CFL podcast is out every Monday and Thursday. We just recently talked to Victor Quee of the Edmonton Elks. So Twitter at 2 and Out CFL, you'll get all your information on there.
Greg, we love it that you're down south promoting the game. Where can we find you?
You can find Scott Adamson and I over at Sports History Network. And you can go to FromThe55YardLine.ca and me at CFL America. And right now, Scott and I, haven't been done a lot of podcasts here in 2022. We've both had a lot going on the personal side. But as next week, I retire from my long-time 31-year career as a probation officer. So after I retire, you'll start seeing more shows come out, hopefully on a much more regular basis. So, and Scott is at Adamson SL on Twitter too. So,
thank you so much, Milty. I know where to find you. Where does everyone else find you?
Right here at the stadium. I might as well take an apartment out here, but you can get at the Spec, short for the Spectator.com.
Well, guys, thank you so much. You three have been fantastic in this program. Of course, guys, you can find us on your favorite podcast catcher. We're Spotify. You know where to find us. And, of course, if you like YouTube, like and subscribe. This has been the CFL This Week. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil. Looking forward to chatting again next week. Enjoy the games, folks. This has been the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network.
The CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil. Subscribe, like, and get the deepest takes on Canada's game every Monday.